It started with a bet, as it usually did. Mike swore he knew a shortcut to get us to the party faster, but instead, we found ourselves on the outskirts of town, facing the ghostly outline of the Suburban Acres Mall. Everyone in Ohio knew the legend. Abandoned for years after a freak fire in the food court, they said the place was haunted. Kids at school would brag about sneaking in, but no one ever stayed past dusk. "Come on, we can check it out for 10 minutes, Mike insisted. "Unless you're scared," he added, grinning at me. I wasn't about to back down. So, with a shrug that masked my nerves, I followed him along with Jess, Tony, and Amber through the shattered glass door that gaped like a broken tooth. The air inside was musty, stale, and thick with dust. The escalators stood still, frozen in time, and broken mannequins stared lifelessly from the darkened windows of forgotten stores. Our footsteps echoed, too loud, and a shiver ran down my spine. 10 minutes, Mike, and we're out of here, Amber muttered, her voice tight with unease. We ventured deeper into the mall, passing flickering old advertisements and the remains of looted kiosks. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the mall was swallowing us whole. The sunlight faded behind the towering walls, and shadows stretched long and dark across the cracked floor tiles. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Tony asked, half joking, but his eyes darted nervously to the shadows. "No one's been here for years," I said, more to reassure myself than anyone else. But that's when we heard it. A footstep. Not ours. All of us froze, hearts hammering. It was a soft, deliberate sound, like someone dragging their foot across the floor in the darkness beyond. We all stood there, hearts pounding in unison, staring into the darkness where the sound had come from. It was subtle, just a soft scrape of something moving, but in the silence of the empty mall, it sounded like thunder. Mike was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Probably just a rat or something." "A rat?" Jess scoffed, but she didn't look convinced. "What kind of rat makes a sound like that?" Amber grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Let's just get out of here, okay? This place gives me the creeps." I was about to agree when Mike, always the idiot, took a few steps forward, grinning. "Come on, we can't back out now. We've barely even explored. It's probably just the wind or," there it was again. Closer this time. A definite shuffle, like feet scuffing the ground. We all turned toward the sound. Beyond us, past the decaying escalators and darkened storefronts, something moved. I squinted, trying to make out the shape, but it was too far into the shadows. Whatever it was, it didn't move like a person. It was slower, almost hesitant, but undeniably there. "Okay, that wasn't the wind," Tony said, his voice shaky. Mike still wasn't backing down. "Fine, fine. Let's check it out. We'll make a loop, and then we can leave." 10 more minutes. Without waiting for a response, he started walking toward the darkness. I hesitated, a knot of dread tightening in my chest, but then I heard Jess mutter, "If we leave him, he'll never shut up about it." So, reluctantly, we followed. The farther we went, the colder it got. The air felt thick, like something heavy was pressing down on us. We passed more storefronts, the mannequins inside twisted into eerie shapes, their faces cracked and staring. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, flickering every so often as though they might come to life at any moment. Then, out of nowhere, Amber gasped. "Did you see that?" We all stopped in our tracks. "See what?" Mike asked, his voice louder than it should have been in the tense quiet. She pointed ahead, toward a long hallway that led deeper into the mall, where the emergency exit signs barely glowed. Someone. I swear I saw someone move. We all looked, squinting, but there was nothing. Just empty corridors and the unsettling silence of a place forgotten by time. "I'm not imagining it," Amber insisted, her voice rising in panic. There was someone there. And then we heard it again. Not one shuffle, but many. The unmistakable sound of multiple footsteps, echoing through the mall. It wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was coming from everywhere. "We're not alone," Jess whispered, her face pale. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the mall, like a metal gate slamming shut. The footsteps stopped. And that's when we realized, they were closer now. Much closer. For a moment, none of us moved. We stood frozen, listening to the suffocating silence that followed the loud bang. The footsteps, though closer, had stopped. The air felt thick, electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm hits. "What the hell was that?" Tony whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. Mike, always trying to play it cool, was visibly shaken now. "Maybe the wind knocked something over. It's an old building." "No," Amber said, her voice trembling. "That was no wind, Mike. We need to get out of here. Now." For once, no one argued. Even Mike didn't push back. We all turned to head back the way we came, our pace quickening with each step. The flickering lights above us seemed to dim, casting long shadows that stretched along the ground, and the eerie quiet of the mall felt oppressive. We were halfway back when we heard it again. The footsteps, multiple sets of them, started up again, but this time they were unmistakably close. Too close. Tony whipped around, his flashlight darting through the darkness, the beam flickering weakly as if the batteries were dying. "Who's there?" he yelled, his voice echoing in the hollow emptiness. The answer was a sudden burst of movement. From behind the rows of forgotten kiosks and broken-down stores, figures emerged. At first, they were just dark shapes, but as they stepped into the dim light, I could see them. Tall, with faces obscured by tattered hoods and cloaks, their eyes glinted unnaturally in the faint light. They moved with an unnatural grace, slow and deliberate, like predators stalking their prey. "Run!" Jess screamed, and that was all it took. We bolted, sprinting back toward the entrance. My heart pounded in my chest as my breath came in ragged gasps. I could hear Amber sobbing, her footsteps stumbling beside me. Mike was yelling something, but I couldn't make out the words over the blood rushing in my ears. The entrance wasn't far, I could see the faint outline of the shattered glass door just ahead. But the sound of footsteps behind us grew louder, faster. They were chasing us. I dared to glance back. My blood ran cold. The figures were running now, and there were more of them. Dozens, maybe. Moving unnaturally fast, their limbs jerking at odd angles as they closed in on us. And their faces, oh God, their faces, were contorted in a grotesque parody of human features, twisted into expressions of pure, sadistic glee. They weren't just chasing us. They were hunting us. "Keep going," Mike shouted. "Don't stop." We were almost there, the shattered glass door just within reach, when a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking our exit. It stood motionless, taller than the others, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. For a second, it didn't move, just stood there as if it was waiting for us. But then, slowly, it raised its arm and pointed directly at me. My legs froze. I couldn't move. It was like my body had turned to stone. My mind screamed for me to run, but I was paralyzed by fear. Jess grabbed my arm, yanking me forward, breaking the spell. "Come on," she screamed. We veered left, away from the main exit, toward the emergency stairwell at the back of the mall. Behind us, the figures let out a terrible, inhuman screech, the sound echoing through the mall, making my skin crawl. We burst through the emergency door, slamming it shut behind us. The stairwell was narrow, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. We could still hear the footsteps outside, growing louder, closer. "They're coming," Tony gasped, his back pressed against the door as if that alone would keep them out. The door shuddered violently as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. Then again. Harder. "They're going to break through," Amber cried, clutching my arms so tightly it hurt. "We have to keep moving," Mike urged, his voice strained. "Upstairs. Maybe we can find another exit." None of us had any better ideas. We raced up the stairs, the sound of splintering wood echoing behind us. Whatever was outside that door, it wouldn't be long before they broke through. As we reached the second-floor landing, I felt a cold breeze brush past me. I turned my head, and in the corner of the stairwell, barely visible in the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes watched us. I stopped, my stomach twisting in knots. "Go," it whispered, the voice low and raspy, as though it hadn't spoken in years. "You won't escape, they always find you." A chill ran down my spine as the words echoed in my mind. We bolted up the stairs, my heart slamming against my ribs as if it wanted to break free. I couldn't shake the sound of that voice, raspy, hollow, and somehow too familiar. The glowing eyes still burned in the back of my mind, like two pinpricks of dread. Jess was ahead of me, her breath sharp and uneven. Mike pushed open the door at the top of the stairs, leading us out onto the second floor of the mall. The moment we burst through, a wave of cold air hit us, and the sound of wind howling through the broken skylights above filled the space. But it wasn't just the wind that made the place feel colder. The lights on this floor barely worked. Every few feet, a flickering bulb buzzed weakly, casting eerie shadows across the open walkway. The stores were even more decayed up here. Broken shelves, shattered glass, and more mannequins, always the mannequins, stood frozen, their cracked faces staring at us as we ran past. I couldn't help but feel like they were watching us, their empty eyes following our every move. "Where do we go?" Amber's voice was barely a whisper, her face pale with fear. "We need to find another way out," Mike said, looking around frantically. "There has to be another exit on this floor. Maybe a fire escape or something." "Fire escape?" Tony snapped, his voice trembling. "Do you hear yourself? We're being hunted. These things are chasing us, and you're talking about a fire escape." Mike ignored him, glancing around for any sign of an exit. But the second floor was worse than the first. Everything seemed twisted, as if the mall itself had shifted in a way that defied logic. Hallways that should have led back to the main atrium now dead-ended in bricked-up walls, and the store layouts made no sense. It was like the building had restructured itself, trapping us inside. We heard the first crash behind us, a door slamming open, followed by that bone-chilling screech. They were on the stairs. They'd broken through. "They're coming," Amber whimpered, clutching her chest as if trying to hold her heart in place. "Run!" Mike shouted, and we took off again, sprinting down the twisting, unfamiliar corridors of the second floor. But no matter how fast we ran, no matter how many corners we turned, it felt like the shadows were closing in. I could hear them behind us, the footsteps. But they weren't the slow, methodical steps from before. Now, they were running. Fast. I dared to glance back, and my heart dropped. The figures were closer. Much closer. They moved like shadows, fast and fluid, their bodies distorting as they twisted through the darkness. Their faces, those grotesque, twisted faces, were even more horrifying up close. Lips peeled back into unnatural grins, revealing jagged teeth that glistened under the flickering lights. Jess tripped, letting out a yelp as she hit the ground hard. "Help!" she cried, scrambling to her feet. I skidded to a stop, grabbing her arm and pulling her up. The sound of the pursuers' feet was getting louder, and the cold, twisted breath of the creatures seemed to brush against the back of my neck. We couldn't stop. Not even for a second. We turned another corner, and then we saw it. A rusted fire escape door, half hidden behind a crumbling wall. Mike ran ahead, shoving the door with his full weight. It didn't budge. "Come on!" Tony screamed. "Get it open." "I'm trying." Mike yelled, throwing his shoulder against the door again. This time, it creaked but didn't fully give. The footsteps were almost upon us. I could feel it, the air growing heavy, thick with the presence of the things hunting us. There was no time. I grabbed a nearby piece of metal debris and slammed it against the door handle. Crash! The door burst open, the metal groaning as it swung outward. We spilled through the opening, but not before I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a figure just inches away. Its hand, pale and bony, reached out for Jess, its fingers brushing her shoulder as we slammed the door shut behind us. We were in a stairwell again, but this one was different, older, rusted, and much narrower. It spiraled down into what looked like a maintenance level, dark and reeking of damp concrete and mildew. What now? Amber gasped, her face streaked with tears. Down, Mike said breathlessly. We keep going down. There has to be an exit somewhere. But as we descended, the air got heavier, thicker. The walls seemed to close in on us, and the sound of water dripping echoed all around. The stairs creaked with every step, groaning under our weight, as if threatening to collapse. And then, we heard it again. The footsteps. They had followed us. But this time, there was no door to block them out. No way to keep them from coming down after us. We were trapped in the stairwell, and the sound of those footsteps, heavy, slow, and deliberate, echoed louder and louder from the floor above. Amber screamed. They're right behind us. Amber's scream echoed through the narrow stairwell, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it seem like the creatures were all around us. The footsteps grew louder, closer, pounding down the rusted stairs like a death march. We had no time. I grabbed Amber's arm and yanked her forward, pushing her to keep moving as the rest of us hurried down the winding staircase. The metal beneath our feet groaned and creaked, threatening to give way at any second. Each step felt like we were walking deeper into the belly of something ancient and evil. Faster, Mike urged, his voice barely holding it together. We have to be faster, but the stairwell seemed endless. The farther down we went, the darker it became. The only light now was from our dying flashlights, flickering as if the batteries were being drained by the very air around us. My breath came in ragged gasps, the walls pressing in closer, the stench of damp concrete and rot overwhelming my senses. Then, without warning, Tony's foot slipped on the wet metal, and he tumbled down the stairs with a sickening crash. Tony! Jess screamed, rushing to his side. He was lying in a heap at the bottom of the stairs, clutching his ankle, his face twisted in pain. They're coming! I shouted, casting a desperate glance back up the stairwell. The footsteps were impossibly close now, just above us, accompanied by that hideous screeching, like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper, more guttural. Mike and I grabbed Tony, pulling him to his feet. He winced, unable to put weight on his leg. I can't run, he stammered, his face pale with fear. Then we'll carry you, Mike said through gritted teeth. We hobbled forward, Tony's weight dragging us down as we moved deeper into the stairwell. The air grew colder with every step, the shadows around us seemed to thicken like a living thing. And then, we hit the bottom. A rusted door stood in front of us, barely hanging on its hinges, the paint peeling and the metal warped. Beyond it, the faintest glimmer of moonlight seeped through a crack. An exit. Go! I shouted, practically shoving Jess and Amber forward. Mike and I dragged Tony toward the door, but as we reached it, we heard the screeching right behind us. I turned, my heart stopping in my chest. The figures were there, standing just beyond the final bend in the stairs. Their twisted faces grinned, those same grotesque, distorted smiles, and their glowing eyes locked onto us like predators sizing up their prey. The lead figure, taller than the rest, took a slow, deliberate step forward, reaching out with one long, bony hand. I shoved the door open, the hinges screaming in protest as it swung outward. We tumbled through the exit, spilling out into a cold, moonlit alley behind the mall. The air hit me like a slap to the face, fresh, real, and alive. But we weren't safe yet. "They're coming!" Mike yelled, slamming the door shut behind us. But it wouldn't hold. The door was too weak, too rusted. I could see the figures moving behind the cracks, pushing against the thin barrier that separated us from them. "Run," I gasped, pulling Tony's arm over my shoulder as we stumbled forward, out into the alley. We had to get as far away from the mall as possible. We made it halfway down the alley before we heard the door behind us explode open. That same inhuman screech filled the night air as the creatures spilled out, their footsteps pounding the pavement like the march of death. I looked around wildly, searching for anything, a hiding place, a way out. Up ahead, an old service van sat parked against the wall, half buried in debris. Without thinking, I dragged Tony toward it, pulling him inside. The others followed, slamming the van's doors shut just as the creatures reached the alley. We crouched in the darkness, our breaths shallow, hearts racing. Through the dirty windows of the van, I could see them, the figures moving through the alley, their glowing eyes scanning the shadows. They prowled, methodical, searching. One of them stopped directly in front of the van. I held my breath, barely daring to blink. It stood there for a moment, its twisted face turning toward us, as if it knew we were inside. The others gathered behind it, their heads cocked unnaturally to the side, waiting for something, for a signal. I could feel Amber trembling beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly. No one dared to move. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the figure let out a low, guttural hiss, and slowly, it turned away. The others followed, melting back into the shadows, disappearing into the night. We stayed frozen in place, barely daring to believe we were safe. The alley was empty again, silent except for the distant hum of the city far beyond. "They're gone," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of our ragged breaths. But as I looked through the cracked window, staring at the mall looming in the distance, I knew the truth. They hadn't left. They were still there. Watching. Waiting. And we had only just escaped, for now.